Yeah, hello everyone, welcome back warrior students. In this video we are going to continue the dual wield guide series, like the dual wield warrior guide series. And in this video we are taking like a specific look into Kebab warrior, or with other words, dual wield arms warrior. If you haven't seen the other two videos that are about dual wield warrior, yeah, I suggest you watch them first, because you will kind of need the informations to understand what I'm talking about. I got a lot of requests for dual wield to make a video about dual wield arms, and yeah, here we go. But like I said in the first video, I think of the series, like this series is not only about dual wield fury, it's about dual wield warrior. So we could even go into tanking a little bit, but I don't think we are going to do that actually. But the important thing is that if you're a warrior, the core mechanics that like concern you depend on the weapon you're using. So yeah, if I say dual wield warrior, a lot of the stuff I say applies to both dual wield fury, kebab, or even dual wield tanking. So yeah, I suggest watch the first videos, the first two videos first, even if you maybe thought that this is only for dual wield fury. It's not. It's as well like to give you basic knowledge about dual wielding as a warrior. And yeah, so the first thing we are going to do is we are going to look at the differences between kebab and dual wield fury. So from now on, I will just say kebab if I mean dual wield arms, and I will just say fury if I mean dual wield fury, even though you could go fury tanking or fury two-hander. But from now on, when I say fury, I mean fury warrior, spec into fury, using blood first, using two one-handers. If I say kebab, I mean, yeah, dual wield arms warrior with mortal strike basically. And the first main difference that comes to mind is like the signature ability that we're using. So warrior kinda has three signature abilities: shield slam, bloodthirst, and mortal strike. And the differences here is obviously the differences between bloodthirst and mortal strike. Like those three buttons are like almost basically the same. So they all three or both of them cost 30 rage. We have to this is a little bit special here. I don't really know why I mentioned this. We only look at mortal strike and bloodthirst here. So they both cost 30 rage. They both have 6 seconds cooldown, and they even share the same cooldown. How did I know that? Because if you spec into both bloodthirst and mortal strike on like Wars of the Lich King, you will see that using mortal strike will put your bloodthirst on CD. Sadly, would be a kind of fun build, but yeah, doesn't work. So they're kind of the same, however they work a little bit differently. Bloodthirst scales on attack power mostly, with a ratio of 1 attack power gives you 0.45 damage on your bloodthirst, or better, 100 attack power will give you 45 damage on your bloodthirst. And on mortal strike, it depends on the weapon you're using, because it scales on weapon damage, and weapon damage scales on attack power, but the slower your weapon, the better your attack power scales for your weapon damage. And if you're using a one-hander, you get 17 damage for your mortal strike on a 100 attack power. So yeah, it scales a lot worse. And because of that, the extra damage that is on top of your mortal strike, this is like 210, will actually take up a significant part of the overall mortal strike damage if you're using a one-hander. So if you want to go kebab warrior, make sure that you learned rank 6 of mortal strike. It will make a noticeable difference. But what does this mean? So if we play Fury, we have bloodthirst on the first priority in a lot of situations in single target. This doesn't really matter most of the time, because we have 1 point into improved Whirlwind if we play Fury. So this means that we can keep bloodthirst and Whirlwind on CD without delaying either of them unless obviously we lose uptime and then we need to run to the boss again, and then both is available at the same time, then you press Bloodthirst first. But on Kebab we don't have the luxury of having 1 point into improved Whirlwind, and this means that a lot of the time we have to decide, do I want to press Mortal Strike or do I want to press Whirlwind? And in the most situations you want to press Whirlwind, and this has like basically as soon as the offhand attack of your Whirlwind deals 210 damage, the damage that your Mortal Strike and your Whirlwind is dealing up front most of the time are roughly the same. But Whirlwind in 99.9% of the cases will cost less wage than Mortal Strike, because yeah, some set bonus will differ the rage costs, but most of the time Whirlwind will be will cost less wage than Mortal Strike. So this is one advantage. The other advantage is Whirlwind scales better on attack power because it scales with your main hand damage and with your offhand damage. And yeah, like I said, as soon as your offhand basically comes and deals more than 210 damage, your Whirlwind deal most of the time upfront more damage than Mortal Strike. But this is not the only benefit that Whirlwind has. So Whirlwind has 2 hits, so this gives you a higher chance to actually score a critical hit. And critical hits are very important because it will apply deep wounds, and this means that it will apply blood frenzy. So this is one advantage. The other advantage is that it will give you flurry stacks, so it will give you a higher chance of increasing your attack speed for a longer time. So yeah, not Bloodthirst. You see, Whirlwind is a lot better actually than Mortal Strike. If your gear is really, really, really bad, maybe your Mortal Strike deals a significant amount of damage, like more damage than Whirlwind, and then you can think about this, but I don't think this is really the case for you. I would suggest just use Whirlwind as a first priority over Mortal Strike if you use Kebab, no matter if there's single target or multi-target. Then we have something else for Whirlwind, and this is that we hit with our offhand, right? And if we have a sword equipped in our offhand, and we use sword specialization, which most Kebab builds will use, we have a chance to get an extra attack proc from the Whirlwind via our offhand that is striking the target with the Whirlwind. And if we look at the most popular Kebab build right now, which is with a mace in the main hand and a sword in the offhand, then with the Whirlwind becomes the only chance we can actively fish, or the only chance we can actively proc a sword spec. So again, another great advantage for Whirlwind over Mortal Strike. So the next difference between Kebab and Fury, which I found to be a strong advantage for Kebab actually, is the 3 out of 3 points into improved discipline. You could go into 3 out of 3 improved discipline even on a Fury build, but this wouldn't be the popular one right now. So right now we are using it as an advantage for the Kebab warrior. So we get 6 seconds more duration of recklessness, which means that we have 21 seconds of recklessness and we get 10 minutes less cooldown. So the uptime of recklessness that we have in a raid scenario is actually a lot higher on Kebab. This sometimes depend on your guild clear speed of the raid, I guess. This means sometimes that you can use recklessness on every boss fight. And recklessness is arguably the most fun button you can press as a warrior, because everything will crit, and if everything crits you have a lot more attack speed, you have a lot more rage, so this means you can press a lot more buttons, and crits obviously are a heck of a lot of fun. So 3 out of 3 improved discipline is for me at least a great advantage for Kebab warrior. But this actually has 2 more or less hidden effects on you that will make you a little bit different from your Fury counterpart. And this is, like we talked in the last video, we talked about that crit loses out on value every time your recklessness is active. to be exact, crit, the value of crit goes on to 0 if your recklessness is active. So with more uptime on recklessness, we can actually see that crit loses out on value if we compare Kebab to Fury Warrior. But yeah, this is not like everything, because in the last video we as well talked about that if you have a lot of rage, you can use a lot of heroic strike. And while recklessness is active, we obviously have a shit ton of rage. So hit has less value on Kebab Warrior as well. Yeah, if we only look at like the effects that improved discipline has on our character, because hit will actually later get a little bit value back throughout sword specialization, but we will talk about this later when we go deeper into sword spec for dual wielding. Alright, so dual wield arms or Kebab changes a lot depending on the weapons you're using, because obviously we spec into weapon specialization on the way down to Blood Frenzy and Mortal Strike. So if we're using a mace, we could go for mace spec, or if we're using a sword, we use sword spec, and sword spec actually changes a lot. And yeah, then we have pole axe specialization. So if you're using an axe for some reason, there's a change as well. So it's kind of hard for me to get in all of the detail, but ideally you want to use swords, so we're going to focus on swords. And first of all, we are going to again look at the most popular build, because it's the most popular one. And the most popular one uses a mace in the main hand and a sword in the offhand. And what does this mean? So this means that your offhand can make your can proc a sword spec, and then the sword spec will be casted with your main hand. So Mr. Gladiator's Quick Blade procs a sword spec, and Mr. Dragon Maw will cast the sword spec then. So it will not deal like 200 damage, it will deal like 1000 damage or 500 damage. It will attack with the main hand basically. And sword spec attacks can proc Wind Fury attacks, and Wind Fury attacks will reset your swing timer. So if you get a sword spec attack from your offhand, and this sword spec attack will then proc a Wind Fury on your main hand, this will mean that your swing timer gets resetted, and a reset of your swing timer in the middle of your swing is not really ideal, but the odds for this to happen is like around about 1%, so it's not really a thing we need to worry about. So basically every time you cast Whirlwind, you have a 1% chance to reset the swing timer on your main hand. But yeah, since you get 2 attacks in return and you didn't delay your Whirlwind and it's only 1%, we really don't need to worry about this, but I think it's good to know at least. The other thing that is a little bit more concerning is that if we are using Heroic Strike Cheese, I will not explain Heroic Strike Cheese here because it would take too long, and I explained it in the last video. So if we're using Heroic Strike Cheese, we have basically a 5% chance which is the chance for our sword spec to occur. We have a 5% chance that the offhand hit that we try to cheese out with our heroic strike will proc a sword spec, and before we can cancel the heroic strike, it will trigger the heroic strike on our main hand. So we originally wanted to cancel the heroic strike, but it will actually be casted, which can lead into a rage starve situation. So if you use heroic strike cheese with your very low rage count, like with 15 or 12 or so, and then your karma hits you and you often procs an extra attack, then your heroic strike will be casted and you find yourself maybe rage starved, unless the 1% chance hits here, and your main hand will then again proc a Wind Fury, which will get you out of rage starve maybe. So yeah, this is again kind of fun. So you want to think twice about using heroic strike cheese when you're on a very low rage count. Anyways, this happens only in 5% of the cases, so yeah, it's not really worth thinking about. I think at least. I think it's still worth it to just do it all the time, because it's only 5% chance. Alright, so with the boring stuff out of the way, we can look into more exciting things. So the ideal version of the Kebab Warrior is played with two swords. And if we have two swords, we have two different kinds of extra attacks that are scaling, or yeah, that are scaling with each other. We have 3 points improved discipline, so we have a lot of recklessness uptime, and we can even go for improved overpower or points into two-handed specialization, which gives this spec the very unique characteristic of being extremely versatile in terms of scaling on stats or rotation optimizations. Like, you can do a lot with this specialization. You can use all kinds of stats, you can use all kinds of rotation methods, and it's really special. Like, every stat combination that you can go for, like crit hit or only crit, strength hit or strength only or strength crit or anything like this, have a dramatic impact on your damage profile, like your damage graph, and will change the look of it actually quite a lot. And you can adapt to this damage graph, and you can optimize your rotation around this and your playstyle, and this will then like give you the ability to have a big impact on your experience, which is extremely special. Like, I have never really seen something like this. For example, I have this graph here, so this is damage obviously, and this is time. And if we use like an only strength build, we have a really high burst, right? Because hit loses out on value and recklessness, crit value gets reduced to 0. So if you pump everything into strength or armor pen or haste maybe later, then we obviously get a really high burst. So we start with the strength build, we start right on the top here, and then we go down after the burst. And then after the burst, we have like a really spiky damage profile. Like, sometimes we drop really low because nothing crits and nothing hits, and sometimes we spike extremely high because everything hits and everything crits, and then the damage goes just through the roof. Like, this is like the roof here, and the damage goes right through that if we use only strength. So, but if we would use, for example, a version that is more focused around hit and crit, we have a slightly lower burst. It's not the lowest burst we can go for, but it's not that high. The reason why it's not the lowest is because hit rating actually grants us the possibility to hit a lot more extra attacks while bursting, because sometimes if we get lucky and burst, and then the extra attacks that we get in burst miss the target, then they don't crit, which is which can be a hard DPS loss. So the burst is like on a slightly lower level on average, but it's still kind of good. And then we have like a lot of damage spikes here that are not really that high, but they don't drop as low as the strength version. And then we have, for example, the version with a lot of crit, but with a lot less hit. And this version will, on average, burst the lowest, or has like a potential to burst kind of low, because we don't have the strength of the first variant, and we don't have the hit of the second one. So sometimes when we burst, we get a lot of extra attack procs, but they actually miss the target, and therefore the burst on average can be a lot lower or a little bit lower. And then we have a very stable DPS, and we have spikes, but they are less often than the ones in the crit, than the ones in the second version, where we have a lot of, let me first draw this. So we have some spikes, and they're like the same as high as the ones in the variant with a lot of hit and a lot of crit, because if we get some extra attack procs and they crit and they all crit, it's like the same spike with the other build, but those spikes will actually not be that often. However, the DPS low we will drop into will not occur as often as well, because we are going to use Heroic Strike Cheese, and we are going to crit on average more often than the second version. So this is, I hope this is not too complicated, but I think it actually makes sense. So we can actually see here that the lowest possible damage that we can do is most of the time with the only strength build, because sometimes we just continuously keep on being on a DPS low because we don't get any spikes. But on the other hand, the highest DPS potential is as well on the strength build or the armor pen build, and this is because sometimes we just spike all the time, and then the damage keeps on a high. So and if we now could find a way to get out of a DPS low when using the strength build, we could actually decrease the chances of keeping a DPS low by a lot, and we could increase the chances of being on a DPS high or getting on a DPS high and then staying there as well. And there are ways to get out of those DPS lows, which are, first of all, Heroic Strike Cheese, because if you cheese your Heroic Strike, you get a lot more rage, and then with a lot of rage, you can get a DPS high very easily, because you press a lot of buttons and you get a lot of extra attack procs, and then sometimes things starting to snowball, and then you can keep your DPS high. And there's another method to get out of a DPS low, which is overpower, and this is especially useful for the strength variant, because your overpower has a higher crit chance, and therefore it gets more value on the strength build. And then you can use your overpower, use Heroic Strike Cheese to get out of those DPS lows. And it isn't really much of a surprise by now that the build that performed the best for me on average was by far the strength variant combined with overpower usage and Heroic Strike Cheese. And this is extremely interesting. But again, the other builds were as well kinda good and just had another damage profile. So I bursted, I did, my DPS stats is 3 minutes, 30 seconds. And so some boss fights are longer than that, some are shorter. The shorter the boss fight, the better for the strength build, obviously. So I kind of think that, I'm pretty sure that the strength build is actually the best one for raiding and everything, basically. Because it's better for PvP as well, just in case you want to play a little bit of Battlegrounds. So I even went so far and used the method to get out of DPS lows, or to basically use overpower in my rotation, that I call like the identity crisis method. So, and this is, I call this method like this because you actually swap to a two-hander to use overpower. Like maybe I can show it to you right now. So you swap to a two-hander to use overpower like this, and then you swap back to Zerker stance, then you use one mortal strike, and then you swap back to dual wield, and then you continue rotation. And this method actually gave me the most DPS for using heroic overpower, but I will not get too deep into this because there's one major problem with this, and this is if you have a totem twisting shaman in your group, it's really hard to do this method without actually messing up big time, because the Wind Fury totem will only be active for like 1 second, or exactly 1.5 seconds. The Wind Fury totem will be active, and so all weapons that are equipped in the moment when the shaman places the totem, all weapons, main hand weapons that are in range in this moment equipped, will get Wind Fury for 10 seconds until he twists again. So if you miss this twist window with your one-handers, you can lose a lot of DPS. And yeah, it becomes extremely awkward. And yeah, and you're not really a dual wield, you're not really a two-handed arms, you're something in between. This is why this method is called the identity crisis method. This actually gets a lot stronger and a lot more useful in cleave scenarios like swapping on a two-hander. But we will get into this more in detail on the next video. Like, the testings on this are not complete in any way, shape or form. Yeah, maybe a quick note on how you want to use overpower. I forgot. Yeah, you're basically, if you're using a strength build and you want to use overpower, you don't want to, you want to analyze the situation you're in right now. And if you think you're on a DPS high, you do not want to swap your stance for overpower. Like, if you're right now sitting on 70 rage, spamming heroic strikes and having a fun time, you do not swap for overpower. You only swap for overpower if you feel like, yeah, the DPS low is coming soon, or if you think you are right now in the DPS low. Then you swap for your overpower. You do not want to, swap from, get from a DPS high into a DPS low by swapping stance for overpower. So never swap if you have a lot of rage, and never swap if like Whirlwind and Mortal Strike are both available on your Berserker stance and you have enough rage to press them. You do not want to swap to use overpower. Swap if you have low rage and Mortal Strike and Whirlwind are on CD, and you will not like actually lose out on Mortal Strike or Whirlwind by using overpower. Yeah, before I forget, I think I have to give you a small crash course in bursting, because if you want to try out the build I just encourage you to do so, you want to know how to burst, because your most strength comes from your burst window. So if you don't know how to burst, you will never really have great success with this build. So the secret lies in salt specialization, strength, crit, extra attack procs, and being able to convert sword spec procs into heroic strikes. And to convert a sword spec proc into an heroic strike, you need to first Q an heroic strike and then press an instant attack. So you have two options to do that. The first option is to spam your heroic strike on one hand and your rotation on the other hand, but you need to be very fast with your heroic strike for this. Like, every time you press Mortal Strike, you basically want to press an heroic strike right before that. Every time your auto attacks starts a new cast, basically, like every time your main hand swing timer starts again, a heroic strike wants to be queued in burst in particular. And to make sure that that you do this, I found it to be the best to use macros. And you need 3 macros for this. The first one is a Mortal Strike Heroic Strike macro, or with other words, a Heroic Strike Mortal Strike macro. This is very important. We can actually cancel this. This is not the thing we want to do for this build. So this one is called Burst MS, the macro. And this is because I only really use this macro while I'm bursting, and I use it instead of my Mortal Strike in most cases. And it's important that the text is /cast heroic strike /cast Mortal Strike. It cannot be the other way around, because this way, every time I press Mortal Strike, I first kill a heroic strike. So if my Mortal Strike procs a sword spec, the sword spec attack will be heroic strike. So this is what this macro is basically for. And then you need the same thing for Whirlwind and for Hamstring. And all those 3 macros are kind of important. And you can bind them. For example, if you see my bar right here, you can see that I have E, Mortal Strike, F, Whirlwind, and 1 Hamstring. And my burst Mortal Strike is on Shift E, my burst Whirlwind is on Shift F, and my burst Hamstring is on Alt 1. And yeah, I have enough buttons to actually use those macros. I actually use a third set for burst cleave scenarios, but yeah, this is not something we worry about right now. And then you basically want to spam those macros if you have enough rage to afford it, to cast. Yeah, so basically you spam your Heroic Strike Hamstring macro, but only if you have enough rage to to continue cast Heroic Strike and to continue cast your other rotation. So we will actually take a small look into this, like I will show you once right now. So this is basically the thing I do every time here. I apply 5 stacks of Thunder Armor, then I will invite my own character here to give myself Wind Fury. So, and then I wait a little bit so that the timer resets. I place that Wind Fury totem. We go for drums here, recklessness, potion, and then start with the Makro and Whirlwind. And now we just spam. Now we start spamming the Mortal Strike. And now we start to spam the Whirlwind again. Now the Mortal Strike again. And next thing will be the Whirlwind again, because it had higher prio than the Mortal Strike. So, and this is how you want to burst with this method. Again, a small warning here. This is a relatively high burst, and you use a lot of Heroic Strike, so doing this at the start of an encounter will most likely kill you. Just so that you know. So be aware of this. This method really starts to shine if the burst is like not actually at the very beginning of the fight, or maybe if your tank is just extremely crazy. So yeah, this is how you want to burst. The other than that, the rotation is simple. I already talked about Heroic Strike Cheese, how you want to execute it, and I also gave you the informations that you need to know when to use Overpower. So yeah, I hope you guys learned something in this video, and until the next one, stay tuned and take care.